The Arizona sun was sinking slowly beyond the horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of orange, gold, and crimson as Ethan Ryder guided his Harley-Davidson down a lonely stretch of highway that seemed to disappear into infinity. The heat of the day still lingered above the asphalt, creating shimmering waves that danced across the road ahead. It had been another long ride, another day spent chasing miles instead of destinations, and Ethan preferred it that way. For nearly 6 years, the road had been his home. Small towns blurred together. Cheap motels came and went. Gas stations became landmarks in a life that no longer followed a map. Most people rode motorcycles because they loved freedom. Ethan rode because standing still hurt too much. At 43 years old, his face carried the marks of a hard life. A scar crossed his jaw from an accident years ago. His beard had begun turning gray. The lines around his eyes told stories he rarely shared. Most people who saw him assumed he was dangerous. In reality, Ethan was simply tired. Tired of memories. Tired of regrets. Tired of replaying the worst night of his life every time he closed his eyes. 6 years earlier, his wife Claire had died in a car accident on a rainy highway outside Denver. One moment they had been planning a future. The next, she was gone. Since then, Ethan had spent thousands of miles trying to outrun grief. He never succeeded. Grief always rode with him. It sat behind him on every highway. It waited beside him at every diner. It followed him into every motel room. Some nights he could almost hear Claire laughing when the wind hit just right. Other nights he wished he could. The rumble of the Harley echoed across the desert as Ethan approached a small roadside town called Dry Creek. The population sign claimed 612 residents, though it looked like half that number had already left. Most buildings appeared old. Many storefronts were empty. The gas station near the highway seemed to be the only place still doing business. Ethan pulled in, parked beside a rusted pickup truck, and climbed off the motorcycle. He stretched his back and glanced around. The town looked quiet. Too quiet. A few locals sat outside a convenience store drinking coffee despite the heat. A mechanic worked on an old truck near a garage. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked. Normal. Ordinary. Exactly the kind of place Ethan preferred. He filled the motorcycle's tank before walking inside the store. The air conditioning hit him immediately. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman with silver hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She smiled when she saw him. Long ride? Ethan nodded. Long life. The woman laughed. Fair enough. He grabbed a bottle of water and a sandwich from a cooler. As he approached the counter, the woman lowered her voice slightly. You heading east? Eventually. Be careful tonight. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Why? The woman glanced toward the windows. Something feels off. Ethan followed her gaze. What do you mean? She shrugged. Cars coming through all day. Tourists. Not exactly. Her expression darkened. Black SUVs. Tinted windows. Out-of-state plates. Ethan didn't respond. Maybe it's nothing. The woman scanned the sandwich. Probably nothing. But her tone suggested otherwise. Ethan paid for the food and thanked her before returning outside. The sun had dropped lower now. Darkness would arrive soon. He considered riding another 100 miles before stopping for the night. Then he noticed something unusual. Across the highway sat an abandoned diner. Its faded sign barely hung from the building. Broken windows reflected the evening light. The place looked deserted. Yet someone stood beside it. A young woman. Ethan almost ignored her. Almost. She appeared to be in her early 20s. Thin. Dirty clothes. Long brown hair tangled by wind and dust. From a distance she looked like someone waiting for a ride. But something about her posture caught his attention. She wasn't waiting. She was watching. Specifically, she was watching every vehicle that passed. Every time headlights appeared, she stiffened. Every time a car slowed, she took a step backward. Fear. Ethan recognized it immediately. He had seen fear before. Real fear. The kind that lived beneath the skin. The kind people carried when they believed danger was close. He looked away. Not his problem. He climbed onto the Harley. Started the engine. Rolled toward the exit. Then he glanced back one more time. The young woman was still there. Watching the road. Watching the cars. Watching everything. And for a brief second their eyes met. Ethan froze. Something in her expression hit him harder than expected. Desperation. Not ordinary desperation. Survival desperation. The kind that appeared when someone believed help might never come. The biker cursed quietly beneath his breath. He hated moments like this. Because they forced choices. Choices led to consequences. Consequences led to complications. And complications had a way of destroying whatever peace he managed to build. He could leave. Keep riding. Forget about her. Most people would. Most people should. Yet when he looked at her again, another memory surfaced. Claire. Standing beside a broken-down car years ago. Smiling while helping a stranger change a tire. Ethan remembered asking why she bothered. Claire's answer had always been simple. Because if everyone keeps driving, eventually nobody stops. The memory lingered. Ethan sighed. Then turned the motorcycle around. The young woman noticed immediately. Fear flashed across her face. She stepped backward. Ethan parked several yards away and removed his helmet. Relax. She didn't relax. I'm not here to hurt you. She remained silent. Ethan studied her carefully. Bruises marked one side of her arm. Her shoes were worn nearly through. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. She looked exhausted. You okay? The question seemed ridiculous the moment he asked it. Obviously she wasn't okay. The young woman glanced toward the highway. You should go. Ethan folded his arms. Maybe. Silence. You waiting for someone? No answer. Running from someone? Her expression changed slightly. Not enough to confirm anything. Enough to suggest he wasn't wrong. Ethan sighed again. Look. He pointed toward the gas station. If you're hungry, I'll buy food. Still silence. Then I'm leaving. He turned slightly. Wait. Ethan stopped. The word barely rose above a whisper. When he looked back, the fear in her eyes seemed even stronger now. She swallowed hard. Please. Another glance toward the road. Another nervous breath. Don't leave yet. Every instinct told Ethan trouble was coming. The smart move was obvious. Leave. Immediately. Instead he remained standing there. What's your name? The young woman hesitated. Emily. Ethan knew instantly it wasn't her real name. He didn't call her out on it. I'm Ethan. She nodded. Neither spoke for several seconds. The silence stretched. Then headlights appeared in the distance. 3 vehicles. Black SUVs. The young woman's reaction was immediate and terrifying. Her entire body froze. Color drained from her face. Her breathing accelerated. She looked like someone watching death approach. Ethan noticed every detail. You know them? She didn't answer. The SUVs entered town. Slowly. Methodically. One passed the gas station. Another turned down a side street. The third continued straight. Searching. Looking. Hunting. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Suddenly the old woman inside the gas station made more sense. The vehicles continued moving through town. The young woman stared at them until they disappeared behind buildings. Only then did she breathe again. Emily. She looked at him. Who are they? Tears appeared instantly in her eyes. Not dramatic tears. Not emotional tears. Terrified tears. The kind people shed when fear becomes impossible to contain. Ethan's expression hardened. What did they do? Her voice trembled. You don't understand. Then help me understand. She shook her head repeatedly. No. Why? More headlights appeared somewhere deeper in town. Doors slammed. Voices echoed faintly through the evening air. The young woman's panic intensified. Because if they find me. She couldn't finish. Ethan waited. Finally she whispered the words. Because if they find me, they'll take me back. The biker stared at her. Back where? Her eyes filled with fresh tears. She looked away. Looked toward the ground. Looked toward the fading sunlight. Then finally spoke the sentence that changed everything. The sentence Ethan Ryder would remember for the rest of his life. My father sold me for money. The world seemed to stop moving. The sounds of the town faded. The highway disappeared. Even the wind felt distant. Ethan simply stared at her, trying to process what he had just heard. The young woman wrapped her arms around herself as tears rolled down her face. Nobody believes me, she whispered. Nobody ever believes me. In the distance, another SUV turned onto the road leading toward the abandoned diner. Slowly. Deliberately. Searching. And for the first time in years, Ethan Ryder felt the familiar sensation he thought he had left behind forever. Anger. Real anger. Dangerous anger. Because whatever story sat behind those words, one thing had become painfully clear. The girl wasn't lying. And the people looking for her were getting closer. The black SUV rolled slowly past the abandoned diner, its tinted windows reflecting the dying light of the Arizona sunset while Ethan Ryder stood beside his motorcycle pretending not to notice the tension radiating from the young woman who called herself Emily. Every instinct he possessed told him she was lying about her name. Every bruise on her arms told him she was telling the truth about everything else. The vehicle continued down the road, moving just slowly enough to make its purpose obvious. It wasn't traveling. It was searching. The moment it disappeared around the corner, the young woman released a shaky breath she seemed to have been holding for minutes. Ethan watched her carefully. How long? She looked confused. What? How long have you been running? The question visibly affected her. She glanced toward the road again before answering. 12 days. Ethan frowned. 12 days. She nodded. I stole a car. The statement surprised him. You stole a car. I didn't have a choice. Her voice cracked. I just ran. Ethan remained silent. She continued speaking as if the words had been trapped inside her for too long. I drove until the gas ran out. Her eyes lowered. Then I walked. The biker studied her torn shoes. Suddenly they made sense. How old are you? 21. Another glance toward the road. Almost 22. Ethan nodded slowly. The story was getting stranger. Start from the beginning. The young woman immediately shook her head. No. Why? Fear returned instantly. Because if you know too much, they'll come after you too. Ethan almost laughed. Looks like they're already here. The truth of that statement hung between them. The young woman seemed to realize it too. For several seconds neither spoke. Then headlights appeared again farther down the street. This time 2 SUVs. Both moving slowly. Both searching. Ethan's expression hardened. The situation was escalating. Come on. The young woman looked startled. What? Ethan pointed toward the gas station. You're getting something to eat. I can't. You can. No. Her voice became desperate. If they see me, Ethan cut her off. Then stop standing in the open. Without waiting for an answer, he began walking toward the gas station. The young woman hesitated. Looked toward the road. Looked toward the diner. Looked toward the approaching vehicles. Then finally followed. Inside, the elderly woman behind the counter immediately noticed them. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Everything all right? Ethan glanced toward the windows. Depends. The woman followed his gaze and immediately spotted the SUVs. Her expression darkened. Those people again. The young woman froze. You've seen them? Been driving through town all day. The old woman lowered her voice. Asking questions. Ethan exchanged a look with her. Neither liked what they were hearing. He guided the young woman toward a small table near the back of the store. Sit. She obeyed reluctantly. Ethan bought coffee, water, and several sandwiches before returning. The moment he placed the food on the table, she stared at it like she hadn't eaten in days. Which, judging by her appearance, might not have been far from the truth. Go ahead. She hesitated only a second before tearing into the sandwich. Ethan watched quietly. Hungry people told the truth more often than frightened people. After several minutes she slowed down. Thank you. You're welcome. Silence followed. Then Ethan asked the question again. Start from the beginning. This time she didn't refuse. Instead she stared down at the table. My real name is Ava. Ethan nodded. He wasn't surprised. Ava what? Ava Collins. She swallowed hard. My father is Richard Collins. The name meant nothing to Ethan. Ava continued. Most people in Colorado know who he is. Should I? She laughed bitterly. He's rich. That explained very little. How rich? Ava looked away. Private jets. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That rich? She nodded. Hotels. Real estate. Construction companies. Ethan leaned back slightly. The story was becoming clearer. And your father sold you? Tears filled her eyes again. Not directly. The answer immediately caught Ethan's attention. What does that mean? Ava struggled with the words. About a year ago he started losing money. The gas station felt quieter now. Outside, darkness continued settling across the town. Bad investments. She looked exhausted just remembering it. Lawsuits. Debt. Ava nodded. A lot. Ethan remained silent. Then he met someone. Who? Her expression changed. Fear. Pure fear. Victor Kane. The name clearly meant something to her. Who is he? Ava stared toward the floor. A monster. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, far beyond the desert horizon. Ethan noticed her hands shaking. Tell me. Ava took a deep breath. Victor owns businesses. Legal businesses. She laughed bitterly. Some. Ethan didn't like that answer. Ava continued. My father borrowed money from him. How much? Millions. Silence followed. Ethan already knew where the story was heading. And he couldn't pay it back. Ava nodded. Tears began rolling down her face. Then Victor made him an offer. The biker's jaw tightened. What kind of offer? Ava closed her eyes. For several seconds she couldn't speak. When the words finally came, they barely rose above a whisper. Me. Ethan felt anger stirring inside him. Explain. Ava looked physically sick. Victor said the debt would disappear. Her voice cracked. If my father gave him what he wanted. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Ethan already knew the answer. He simply needed to hear it. And what did he want? Ava stared directly at him. A daughter. The words hit like a punch. Ethan slowly leaned back in his chair. For several seconds he couldn't speak. Not because he didn't understand. Because he did. Perfectly. Ava wiped tears from her face. At first I thought my father would never agree. She laughed once. A hollow sound. I was stupid. Ethan said nothing. Ava continued. The negotiations lasted weeks. Every word sounded painful. Then months. Her breathing became uneven. One night I overheard them talking. Ethan watched her carefully. Talking about what? Ava's eyes filled with horror. The price. The biker felt something cold settle into his chest. What happened? 3 days later my father signed the papers. Ethan froze. Papers? Ava nodded. Contracts. Contracts for what? Her answer came immediately. Ownership. The word lingered heavily between them. Ownership. Not custody. Not guardianship. Ownership. Ethan's hands tightened around his coffee cup. That can't be legal. Ava laughed again. It wasn't. She stared toward the windows. That's why nobody was supposed to know. Outside, another SUV rolled slowly past the gas station. This one slowed noticeably. Ava saw it. Instantly her face went pale. They're here. Ethan glanced outside. The vehicle continued forward before stopping farther down the street. Doors opened. Men stepped out. How many? Ava's breathing accelerated. Too many. Ethan watched as several men spread through the town. Searching. Looking. Hunting. The old woman behind the counter noticed too. Oh no. Ava's voice trembled. We need to leave. Ethan remained calm. Maybe. Not maybe. Panic entered her voice. Now. Ethan stood slowly and walked toward the window. The men outside weren't locals. Expensive clothes. Professional posture. Controlled movements. They weren't acting like kidnappers chasing a victim. They were acting like employees retrieving lost property. That realization made Ethan even angrier. One of the men approached a nearby store and showed someone a photograph. Another spoke with a mechanic. A third scanned the area methodically. Ava stood beside the table. Terrified. Please. Ethan looked at her. What happens if they catch you? Tears filled her eyes again. I disappear. The simplicity of the answer made it worse. Ethan nodded slowly. Then he noticed something. One of the men outside had spotted the motorcycle. The man pointed. Another turned. They were looking directly toward the gas station now. Ava saw it too. They found me. Ethan's expression hardened instantly. The man outside began walking toward the entrance. Another followed. Then a third. Deliberate. Calm. Confident. Like men who expected obedience. Ethan glanced toward the old woman behind the counter. Back door. She nodded immediately. Storage room. Ava looked stunned. You're helping. The old woman stared toward the approaching men. Honey. Her voice carried unexpected steel. I'm 82 years old. She removed her glasses. At my age, doing the right thing gets a lot easier. The front door opened. A bell rang. 3 men entered the store. Expensive watches. Expensive shoes. Dangerous eyes. The leader smiled politely. Good evening. Ethan immediately disliked him. The man removed a photograph from his jacket. We're looking for someone. Ava froze. Ethan stepped slightly in front of her. The man noticed. His smile widened. Have you seen this girl? He held up the photograph. It was Ava. Ethan looked at it briefly. Then back at the man. Nope. The lie came effortlessly. The man's smile never changed. Interesting. His eyes moved toward Ava. Because I think you have. And in that moment Ethan realized the situation was about to become far more dangerous than either of them imagined. The man holding the photograph never stopped smiling, and somehow that made him more dangerous than the armed men outside. Ethan Ryder had met plenty of predators during his life. Some looked violent. Some looked cruel. The worst ones looked polite. This man belonged in the second category. His expensive suit appeared untouched despite the desert dust outside. His watch probably cost more than most vehicles in Dry Creek. His expression remained calm, confident, almost friendly. Yet his eyes told a different story entirely. They were cold. Empty. Calculating. The kind of eyes that viewed people as assets rather than human beings. Ava Collins stood frozen behind Ethan, every muscle in her body locked in place. The moment she saw the man, Ethan noticed the change immediately. This wasn't just another pursuer. This was someone important. Someone personal. Someone she truly feared. The stranger slowly lowered the photograph. Ava. His voice sounded almost disappointed. You've made this much harder than it needed to be. The young woman's breathing became uneven. Ethan stepped slightly farther in front of her. Stores closed. The man chuckled softly. Is it? He glanced toward the elderly woman behind the counter. Doesn't look closed. The old woman folded her arms. Looks closed now. One of the men beside him smirked. The leader ignored it. His attention remained fixed on Ava. Victor is worried about you. Ava actually laughed. The sound contained no humor whatsoever. Good. For the first time a crack appeared in the man's composure. Tiny. Brief. But visible. You don't understand the situation. I understand it perfectly. Ava's voice shook with anger now. Tell Victor to go to hell. The smile vanished completely. The store suddenly felt smaller. More dangerous. Ethan noticed all 3 men subtly adjusting their posture. Not reaching for weapons. Preparing for resistance. That's unfortunate. The leader sighed. Because Victor was hoping we could avoid unpleasantness. Ethan folded his arms. Funny. The man looked at him. What? I was thinking the same thing. Silence filled the room. Outside, several more SUVs arrived. Doors opened. More men stepped into the street. The old woman behind the counter quietly picked up her phone. The leader noticed immediately. I wouldn't do that. Try stopping me. The old woman stared directly at him. The man considered responding. Then decided against it. Instead he focused on Ethan. This doesn't concern you. Ethan almost smiled. Then why are you talking to me? No answer came. The biker continued. The girl's not interested. The girl doesn't get a vote. The statement slipped out before the man could stop it. The instant he said it, Ethan's expression changed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Wrong answer. The leader sighed. Look. He reached inside his jacket slowly. Ava immediately flinched. Ethan prepared himself. But instead of a weapon, the man removed a folded document. This is a legal agreement. He held it up. Signed willingly. Ava's eyes widened with disbelief. You're insane. The man ignored her. Everything has been documented. Ethan stared at the paperwork. You seriously expect me to believe somebody can sell their daughter? The man's smile returned. Not sell. What's the difference? Guardianship transfer. Ethan laughed. A genuine laugh. That's the dumbest thing I've heard all year. The leader's patience visibly thinned. The details aren't your concern. They are now. The man slowly folded the paper again. Outside, darkness continued settling across Dry Creek. The first stars appeared above the desert. The timing couldn't have been worse. Night favored hunters. Ava knew it. The fear in her eyes made that obvious. Suddenly the bell above the entrance rang again. Everyone turned. A local sheriff stepped inside. Middle-aged. Slightly overweight. Weathered face. Tired eyes. He removed his hat and glanced around. The tension in the room immediately caught his attention. Everything all right? The leader smiled instantly. Absolutely. Ethan didn't miss how quickly the man recovered his charm. Just looking for a missing family member. The sheriff nodded slowly. That's so. His gaze shifted toward Ava. Recognition flashed across his face. Very briefly. But Ethan saw it. Ava saw it too. Her entire body stiffened. The sheriff knew who she was. Worse. He knew exactly why she was running. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. The sheriff approached calmly. Mind if I see the picture? The leader handed it over. The lawman examined it for several seconds. Then looked toward Ava. Then back toward the photograph. Interesting. Silence followed. Ethan waited. Ava barely seemed capable of breathing. Finally the sheriff handed the photograph back. Never seen her. Relief flooded Ava's face. The leader didn't look convinced. You sure? Positive. The sheriff's tone left no room for argument. Another long silence followed. Then the leader smiled once more. Thank you for your time. The sheriff nodded. Any time. Yet nobody moved. Nobody left. The standoff continued. Outside, the number of SUVs kept increasing. The leader eventually sighed. This is becoming tiresome. Ethan agreed. Then leave. The man looked toward Ava one final time. Victor won't stop. Fear returned immediately. Tell him I'm never going back. The leader's expression hardened. That isn't your decision. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. The other men followed. Moments later the vehicles outside began moving again. Slowly. Deliberately. Not retreating. Repositioning. Ethan watched through the window until the last SUV disappeared around a corner. Only then did Ava collapse into a chair. They're not leaving. The sheriff removed his hat. No. Ava looked at him. You know who they are. The lawman nodded reluctantly. Yeah. Then arrest them. The sheriff laughed bitterly. Kid. He sat down heavily. If it were that easy, we'd have done it already. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? The sheriff stared toward the darkened street. Victor Kane owns half the state. Silence followed. Judges. Another pause. Lawyers. Another. Politicians. Ava closed her eyes. The sheriff continued. Every time somebody investigates him, evidence disappears. His expression darkened. Witnesses too. Ethan didn't like where this conversation was going. How many people work for him? The sheriff shook his head. Nobody knows. The answer wasn't reassuring. Ava stared toward the floor. Then there's no point. Ethan looked at her. What? Running. Tears appeared again. He'll find me. The sheriff remained silent. He couldn't argue. Ethan noticed. There's more. The lawman hesitated. Yeah. What? The sheriff looked directly at Ava. Victor isn't the real problem. The young woman frowned. What do you mean? The sheriff sighed heavily. Victor works for somebody. Silence crashed over the room. Ethan's expression hardened. Who? Nobody knows. The answer came immediately. People whisper about him. The lawman rubbed his forehead. Nobody ever sees him. Ava stared at him. You're saying there's someone above Victor? The sheriff nodded. A lot higher. The room suddenly felt much colder. Ava looked physically ill. Then we're dead. Ethan remained calm. Not yet. You don't understand. Her voice cracked. If Victor answers to somebody else, then we deal with them too. The confidence in Ethan's voice surprised everyone. Even him. The sheriff actually laughed. You got a plan? Ethan thought about it. Then shrugged. Not currently. That's what I thought. The biker leaned against the table. But I know somebody who might. Ava frowned. Who? Ethan pulled out his phone. For several seconds he stared at a name saved deep in his contacts. A name he hadn't called in nearly 5 years. Mason Walker. President of the Iron Brotherhood Motorcycle Club. Old friend. Occasional enemy. Reliable troublemaker. The kind of man who considered impossible situations a personal challenge. Ava watched him carefully. Who is Mason? Ethan smiled slightly. The reason I never lose sleep when things get ugly. Then he pressed the call button. The line began ringing. Outside, hidden somewhere in the darkness beyond Dry Creek, Victor Kane's men continued searching. And none of them realized that before the night ended, they were about to attract the attention of an entire biker brotherhood. The phone rang 3 times before the call connected. For several seconds only the sound of wind echoed through the speaker. Then a familiar voice answered. If this is another charity fundraiser, lose my number. Ethan immediately smiled. Good to hear you're still charming. Silence followed. Then came a loud laugh. Well, I'll be damned. Mason Walker's voice carried the same rough edge Ethan remembered. You finally decided to call. Ethan leaned against the table inside the gas station. Need a favor? Another laugh. Of course you do. Ava watched nervously while the sheriff folded his arms nearby. Mason continued speaking. How bad? Ethan glanced toward the window where another black SUV slowly rolled through town. Bad. Define bad. Human trafficking. Silence. Instant silence. Ethan knew Mason well enough to understand what that meant. The biker president's mood had changed immediately. You sure? Very. Another pause. Victims? Ethan looked toward Ava. One sitting next to me. Mason exhaled slowly. Location? Ethan gave him the coordinates. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. Ava looked confused. Neither interrupted. Mason listened carefully. Stay there. That's the plan. No. Mason's voice hardened. That's an order. Ethan laughed. Since when do you give me orders? Since you're calling me for help. The line disconnected. Ava blinked. That's it? Ethan slid the phone back into his pocket. That's it. You didn't explain anything. Didn't need to. The young woman looked even more confused. The sheriff wasn't. He knew exactly what kind of reputation the Iron Brotherhood carried throughout the Southwest. How many? The lawman asked quietly. Ethan shrugged. Depends how bored they are. The sheriff frowned. That's not reassuring. Ethan smiled. It wasn't supposed to be. Outside, darkness fully settled across Dry Creek. Streetlights flickered on. Most businesses closed. The town became quieter. Yet the SUVs remained. Waiting. Watching. Searching. Like wolves circling prey. Ava couldn't stop staring through the windows. Every passing headlight made her flinch. Every shadow made her nervous. Ethan noticed. You need sleep. She laughed bitterly. I haven't slept properly in almost 2 weeks. I can tell. The sheriff nodded toward a hallway near the back of the gas station. Storage room has a cot. Ava immediately shook her head. No. Ethan frowned. Why? Her answer came instantly. Because every time I close my eyes, they find me. The room fell silent. Nobody knew how to respond to that. Finally, the elderly woman behind the counter approached carrying a blanket. Honey. Her voice sounded gentle. Sometimes the hardest thing a survivor can do is rest. Ava stared at her. The old woman smiled sadly. Trust me. Something in those words seemed to resonate. Slowly, reluctantly, Ava accepted the blanket. Minutes later she disappeared into the storage room. The moment the door closed, the sheriff turned toward Ethan. You believe her? Ethan didn't hesitate. Yeah. Why? The biker looked toward the hallway. Because nobody can fake that kind of fear. The sheriff nodded. He believed her too. Victor Kane is dangerous. Ethan looked at him. You've said that. You don't understand. The lawman lowered his voice. People disappear around him. I figured. Not criminals. The sheriff's expression darkened. Journalists. Ethan's jaw tightened. Witnesses. Politicians. Federal investigators. Silence settled over the room. Anybody who gets close. Ethan stared toward the dark street. Then somebody should have stopped him a long time ago. The sheriff laughed humorlessly. Good luck finding volunteers. The hours passed slowly. Midnight approached. The town slept while tension continued building beneath the surface. Around 11:30 a distant sound finally broke the silence. Motorcycles. Lots of them. The roar echoed across the desert long before headlights appeared. Ethan smiled immediately. The sheriff did not. Holy hell. Headlights emerged on the horizon. Then more. Then dozens more. Engines thundered through the darkness. Residents began turning on lights inside nearby homes. Curtains moved. Windows opened. People peeked outside. The convoy entered Dry Creek like a storm. More than 30 motorcycles rolled through town before stopping near the gas station. Men and women stepped off their bikes. Leather cuts. Heavy boots. Road-worn faces. The Iron Brotherhood had arrived. Mason Walker climbed off the lead motorcycle and removed his helmet. Time hadn't changed him much. He was larger than Ethan remembered. His beard contained more gray. His scars looked older. His attitude remained exactly the same. You look terrible. Ethan laughed. Good to see you too. Mason embraced him briefly before stepping back. Where's the kid? Ethan pointed toward the hallway. Sleeping. Mason nodded approvingly. Good. Several other bikers gathered nearby. One woman approached carrying a tablet. We checked the plates. Ethan looked at her. And? They're real. The sheriff frowned. What does that mean? The woman turned the screen toward him. Victor Kane's people aren't hiding anymore. Ethan studied the information. Company registrations. Property records. Security contracts. Vehicle ownership documents. The operation surrounding Ava was larger than anyone initially realized. Mason glanced at the screen. That's a lot of money. A lot. Ethan looked toward the sheriff. You know any of these names? The lawman's face turned pale. Some. Problem. Huge problem. He pointed at one entry. That man's a senator. Another. That's a federal judge. Another. That's one of the biggest developers in Colorado. Silence followed. The implications became obvious immediately. Victor Kane wasn't running an isolated operation. He was protected. Connected. Embedded. Ava wasn't fleeing one dangerous man. She was fleeing an entire system. Mason whistled softly. Well. Ethan looked at him. Well, what? The biker president grinned. Looks like we're officially in the deep end. Around 2 in the morning Ava finally emerged from the storage room. She stopped instantly when she saw dozens of bikers occupying the gas station. What happened? Ethan pointed. Backup arrived. Ava stared in disbelief. Mason approached carefully. You must be Ava. The young woman nodded nervously. Mason extended his hand. Mason Walker. She shook it cautiously. There's really 30 of you. Mason laughed loudly. 30. He pointed toward the highway. Honey, those are just the ones who got here first. The answer stunned her. For the first time since Ethan found her, a faint smile appeared on her face. Small. Fragile. But real. Then one of the bikers rushed through the entrance. We've got movement. Instantly every conversation stopped. Mason turned. Where? South side of town. The biker looked serious. A lot of vehicles. Ethan moved toward the window. Headlights filled the darkness. Dozens of them. Not 3 SUVs. Not 6. More than 20. Ava's face drained of color. No. Mason studied the approaching convoy. Friends of yours? Ava whispered the answer. Victor. Silence followed. The vehicles entered town from multiple directions simultaneously. North. South. East. West. Surrounding the area. Trapping exits. Blocking roads. Ethan immediately understood the strategy. This wasn't a search anymore. It was a retrieval operation. Victor Kane had finally grown tired of waiting. Mason cracked his knuckles. Now we're talking. The sheriff looked horrified. There's too many. Mason grinned. That's usually how trouble works. More SUVs arrived. Men stepped out carrying radios. Flashlights. Weapons. Ava looked ready to collapse. Ethan stepped beside her. Breathe. They're everywhere. I know. We're trapped. Ethan shook his head. No. Ava looked confused. What? Ethan nodded toward the dozens of bikers gathering outside. Engines rumbled. Headlights illuminated the street. Leather-clad figures prepared themselves calmly. Now they're trapped with us. Across town, a black SUV door opened. A tall man stepped out. Expensive suit. Silver hair. Cold eyes. Victor Kane himself. Even from a distance Ava recognized him instantly. Terror flooded her expression. That's him. Ethan followed her gaze. Victor? She nodded. Mason studied the man carefully. Smaller than I expected. Victor slowly removed a pair of gloves and looked directly toward the gas station. Even from across the street, the hatred in his expression was unmistakable. Then he smiled. The sight chilled Ava immediately. Because she knew that smile. It was the smile Victor wore whenever someone suffered. And as the two sides stared at each other across the sleeping town of Dry Creek, everyone understood the same thing. The chase was over. The confrontation they had all been racing toward for nearly 2 weeks had finally arrived. And before sunrise, somebody's life was going to change forever. Victor Kane stood beneath the glow of the streetlights with the confidence of a man who had never truly lost before. Around him, dozens of black SUVs lined the roads of Dry Creek while armed men spread through the quiet town, sealing exits and controlling intersections. The small desert community that had seemed forgotten by the rest of the world only hours earlier now looked like a battlefield waiting for the first shot. Inside the gas station, silence filled the room as everyone watched through the windows. Ava Collins could barely breathe. Her worst nightmare stood less than 100 yards away. The man responsible for destroying her life. The man who had purchased her future as if she were property. The man who had convinced her father that money mattered more than blood. Ethan Ryder noticed her trembling immediately. Look at me. Ava turned toward him. Tears were already forming. He's here. Ethan nodded. I know. You don't understand. Her voice cracked. When Victor wants something, he gets it. Ethan remained calm. Not tonight. Ava wanted to believe him. She truly did. But fear built from experience was difficult to silence. For nearly a year Victor Kane had haunted every part of her life. She remembered the first time she met him. She had been sitting beside her father during a private dinner at their Colorado estate. Richard Collins had seemed nervous all evening. Victor had arrived wearing an expensive suit and carrying a smile that never reached his eyes. At first he appeared charming. Polite. Professional. But even then something felt wrong. Something beneath the surface. Throughout dinner Victor barely spoke to Richard. Instead he asked Ava questions. Where she studied. What she enjoyed. Whether she planned to travel. At the time she thought he was simply making conversation. Looking back, she realized he had been evaluating a purchase. The memory made her sick. Across the room, Mason Walker watched the approaching convoy with growing interest. Unlike Ava, he wasn't frightened. If anything, he seemed amused. Big operation. The biker president cracked his neck. Guy must really want her back. The sheriff looked horrified. You think this is funny? Mason glanced at him. No. He smiled slightly. I think it's predictable. Outside, Victor's men continued positioning themselves throughout town. Radios crackled. Flashlights swept across buildings. Engines idled. The entire operation looked military in its precision. Ethan noticed. So did every biker present. These weren't random thugs. They were organized. Trained. Disciplined. Dangerous. One of the Iron Brotherhood members stepped inside carrying a tablet. We intercepted some radio traffic. Mason looked up. And? They're preparing to move. Ethan frowned. How many? The biker shook his head. All of them. Silence followed. Ava felt her stomach drop. Mason, however, looked pleased. Good. The sheriff stared at him. Good. Saves us time. Before anyone could respond, a loudspeaker suddenly crackled outside. Every head turned toward the window. Victor Kane stood beside one of the SUVs holding a microphone. His voice echoed across the sleeping town. Ava. The young woman froze instantly. This doesn't need to continue. Ethan saw pure terror flood her face. Victor continued speaking. Come outside. The entire town seemed to hold its breath. Nobody gets hurt. Mason rolled his eyes. They always say that. Victor's voice echoed again. You know how this ends. Ava couldn't look away from the window. You know you're tired. Another pause. You know you're scared. His tone sounded almost gentle. Almost caring. Ethan recognized the manipulation immediately. Victor wasn't speaking to a victim. He was speaking to someone he believed he owned. Come home. The words hit Ava harder than any threat. Because they sounded exactly like her father. Memories flooded back. The arguments. The lies. The promises. The excuses. Richard Collins insisting everything would work out. Richard Collins assuring her Victor was helping the family. Richard Collins telling her she didn't understand. Then the night she overheard the truth. The contracts. The negotiations. The price. She remembered standing outside her father's office listening through a partially open door while Victor discussed her future like a business asset. She remembered hearing her father agree. She remembered realizing that the man who was supposed to protect her had sold her. Not metaphorically. Not emotionally. Literally. For money. The betrayal still hurt more than the fear. Outside, Victor waited. No answer came. His smile slowly faded. Ava. His voice hardened. Don't make this difficult. Mason stepped toward the door. I've heard enough. Ethan grabbed his arm. Easy. Easy. Mason laughed. Guy's talking like she belongs to him. I noticed. Makes me want to hit something. Ethan smiled slightly. Get in line. Another biker entered from the back of the building. We've got movement. Mason immediately focused. Where? 3 teams moving toward the station. The room became very quiet. Victor had finished talking. Now he was acting. Ethan stepped toward the window and counted headlights. More arriving. More men exiting vehicles. More flashlights sweeping across the darkness. Ava wrapped her arms around herself. They're coming. Ethan nodded. Yeah. What do we do? The biker looked toward Mason. The 2 men exchanged a glance. No words were necessary. Years of friendship handled that part. Mason grinned. About time. He turned toward his club members. Positions. Instantly the Iron Brotherhood moved. Men and women exited the gas station. Motorcycles started. Engines roared. Riders spread through town. Blocking roads. Securing intersections. Establishing defensive positions. Ava watched in disbelief. There had to be 40 bikers now. Maybe more. Additional headlights appeared on distant roads. Reinforcements. Ethan noticed too. You called more people. Mason shrugged. Maybe. The sheriff looked stunned. How many bikers do you know? Mason laughed. All of them. Outside, the atmosphere shifted rapidly. Victor's men realized they were no longer dealing with a frightened runaway and one protective stranger. They were facing an organized group willing to stand their ground. Radios crackled constantly. Orders changed. Plans adjusted. Yet Victor himself remained calm. He simply watched. Evaluating. Calculating. Waiting. That worried Ethan more than anger would have. Then a phone rang. Ava looked down at her pocket. Her entire body froze. She slowly removed the device. One number displayed on the screen. Dad. Silence filled the room. Ethan looked at her. You don't have to answer. Ava stared at the phone. Her hand trembled violently. For nearly a year she had avoided him. Ignored him. Hated him. Yet seeing the word Dad still hurt. Finally she pressed accept. Ava. Richard Collins sounded exhausted. Older. Broken. Please listen. Tears immediately filled her eyes. Don't. Please. His voice cracked. Just listen. The room remained silent while everyone pretended not to hear. I'm sorry. Ava laughed bitterly. Sorry. I never wanted this. You signed the papers. Silence. Richard couldn't deny it. I thought I could fix everything. With money. More silence. Ava felt years of pain pouring out. You sold me. No. His voice sounded desperate. I was trying to save us. You sold me. This time the words came louder. Stronger. More painful. You looked at your daughter and decided she was worth less than your debt. Richard began crying. Actual crying. Ava, don't. Her voice broke. You don't get to call me that anymore. The room fell completely silent. Even Mason looked uncomfortable. Richard struggled to speak. Victor lied to me. Ava closed her eyes. I don't care. I didn't know what he was. I don't care. I was wrong. Tears streamed down her face. I don't care. Then she ended the call. The silence afterward felt enormous. Ethan gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Ava finally broke. Months of fear. Betrayal. Grief. Exhaustion. Everything exploded at once. She cried harder than she had since escaping. The sheriff looked away respectfully. Mason stared toward the windows. Nobody interrupted. Nobody offered advice. Some pain needed space. Outside, Victor's men continued advancing. The confrontation was approaching rapidly. Minutes later another biker rushed inside. Problem. Mason looked up. What now? We've got federal vehicles approaching. Everyone froze. Ethan frowned. Federal? Yeah. The biker pointed toward the highway. Several of them. The sheriff immediately moved toward the window. Headlights appeared in the distance. Different vehicles. Different formation. Different purpose. Victor saw them too. For the first time all night, his expression changed. Not fear. Concern. Ethan noticed immediately. Interesting. Mason smiled. What? Ethan nodded toward Victor. He wasn't expecting company. The federal vehicles entered town at speed. SUVs. Unmarked. Professional. Purposeful. They didn't stop at the edge of Dry Creek. They drove straight toward the center. Straight toward Victor Kane. Straight toward the confrontation. Ava wiped tears from her face and stared through the window. Something was changing. The balance of power. The momentum. The entire night. For the first time since running away, she saw uncertainty in Victor's eyes. And that meant something extraordinary was about to happen. The war she thought she was fighting alone was becoming much larger than anyone imagined. And before dawn arrived over the Arizona desert, truths hidden for years would finally come into the light. The federal convoy tore through the center of Dry Creek like a storm arriving at exactly the right moment. Tires screeched. Doors flew open. Agents wearing tactical gear spread through the streets with disciplined precision. Commands echoed through the desert night. Flashlights swept across buildings. Radios crackled constantly. For the first time since arriving, Victor Kane's operation looked uncertain. Ava Collins stood frozen beside the gas station window, staring as dozens of federal agents moved into position around the town. She could hardly process what she was seeing. For 12 days she had lived with one certainty: Victor always won. Victor always found people. Victor always escaped consequences. Yet now, as she watched him standing beside his SUV, she saw something she had never witnessed before. Concern. Ethan Ryder noticed it too. Look at him. Ava swallowed hard. He's scared. Mason Walker laughed. Good. Across the street, Victor quickly recovered his composure. He stepped forward calmly as several agents approached. His expensive suit remained immaculate. His posture remained confident. To anyone unfamiliar with him, he probably looked innocent. Respectable. Professional. But Ava knew better. She remembered every lie. Every manipulation. Every threat disguised as kindness. Every moment he had convinced powerful people to ignore the suffering he created. One of the agents stopped several feet away. Victor Kane. Victor smiled. Can I help you? The lead agent held up credentials. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Victor's expression didn't change. Congratulations. The sarcasm wasn't subtle. We're here to ask a few questions. Victor glanced around the town. Seems excessive. That depends on the answers. Silence followed. Then Victor slowly smiled. I assume this is about Ava. The agent didn't respond. Victor nodded. She's a troubled young woman. Ava actually laughed. The sound surprised everyone. Troubled. Tears formed in her eyes. You tried to own me. Victor finally looked directly toward the gas station. Their eyes met through the darkness. For a brief moment, nobody else existed. Ava felt years of fear pressing down on her. But something had changed. She wasn't running anymore. And Victor knew it. The FBI agent noticed the exchange immediately. Interesting. Victor looked away. This is a misunderstanding. We'll decide that. The conversation continued outside while more agents spread through town. Inside the station, another agent entered carrying a folder. Which one is Ava Collins? Ava raised her hand slowly. The woman approached carefully. My name is Agent Sarah Mitchell. Her voice sounded calm and reassuring. We've been looking for you. Ava frowned. Looking for me? Sarah nodded. 4 months. Silence filled the room. Ethan exchanged a glance with Mason. Ava looked confused. Why? Sarah opened the folder. Photographs filled the pages. Documents. Reports. Names. Because you're not the first. Ava stared at the images. Young women. Different ages. Different states. Different backgrounds. But all connected by one horrifying similarity. They had vanished. Some years ago. Some recently. Some were still missing. Ava felt her stomach drop. Oh God. Sarah nodded grimly. We've been investigating a network. Ethan stepped closer. Human trafficking. Among other things. Sarah's expression darkened. Much worse. Ava stared at the photographs. Some faces looked familiar. She remembered seeing them at Victor's properties. At private gatherings. At places she never fully understood. They're real. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Every one of them. Sarah looked at her carefully. Can you identify people connected to these cases? Ava stared at the photographs. Then slowly nodded. Some. Sarah immediately closed the folder. Then we need to get you somewhere safe. The word safe felt strange. Almost foreign. Ava wasn't sure she remembered what safety felt like. Outside, tensions continued escalating. Federal agents were questioning Victor's men. Vehicles were being searched. Identification was being checked. Some of Victor's employees remained calm. Others looked nervous. Very nervous. Mason noticed immediately. They're cracking. Ethan nodded. Good. The biker president smiled. One talks, the rest fall apart. Unfortunately, Victor understood that too. Which explained what happened next. One of his men suddenly ran. The movement happened so quickly that nobody reacted immediately. The man sprinted toward an SUV parked near the edge of town. Agents shouted commands. More agents moved. Then gunfire exploded across the night. Ava screamed. The entire town erupted into chaos. The fleeing man collapsed beside the vehicle. Nobody knew who fired first. Nobody cared. Instantly weapons appeared. Agents took cover. Victor's security team scattered. Orders echoed through the darkness. Ethan grabbed Ava and pulled her away from the windows. Down. Mason moved toward the entrance with several bikers. Stay with her. Ethan nodded. More gunshots echoed outside. Glass shattered somewhere nearby. Tires screeched. The confrontation everyone feared had finally arrived. Yet amid the chaos, something unexpected happened. Victor Kane disappeared. One moment he stood near the center of town. The next he was gone. Ethan noticed first. Where'd he go? Nobody knew. Agent Sarah immediately grabbed her radio. Victor is moving. Her voice sounded urgent. Repeat, target is moving. Outside, federal agents searched frantically. Vehicles accelerated. Flashlights swept across alleys. Yet Victor remained invisible. Ava felt cold dread returning. He's running. Ethan looked at her. Maybe. She shook her head. No. Terror filled her eyes. He's coming for me. The possibility hung heavily in the air. Victor wasn't the kind of man who accepted defeat. If he believed everything was collapsing, he would focus on the one thing he still considered his. Ava. Suddenly a crash echoed from the rear of the building. Everyone turned. Another crash followed. Then a door burst open. Victor Kane stepped inside. The gas station went silent. For several seconds nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Victor stood alone. His suit was dusty now. His hair disheveled. But his eyes remained cold. Focused. Dangerous. He looked directly at Ava. Come with me. The words sounded absurd considering the situation. Yet Victor delivered them with complete confidence. Ava stared at him. No. Victor smiled faintly. You don't have a choice. Ethan stepped forward. Actually, she does. Victor barely acknowledged him. Move. Ethan didn't. Neither did Mason, who had just returned through the front entrance. Suddenly Victor found himself facing several very large bikers who looked eager for an excuse. Yet he remained calm. Interesting. Mason grinned. You don't look very interesting. Victor ignored him. His attention remained fixed on Ava. Your father is dead. The room froze. Ava felt her heart stop. What? Victor sighed. Heart attack. Tears immediately filled her eyes. You're lying. No. Victor's voice sounded almost bored. He died 3 hours ago. Silence consumed the room. Ava couldn't process the words. Richard Collins. Her father. The man who betrayed her. The man she hated. The man she still loved despite everything. Gone. Just gone. Victor continued speaking. His final regret was you. Ethan wanted to hit him. Ava looked shattered. Stop. Victor took a step forward. He wanted forgiveness. Stop. Another step. He died believing you hated him. Ava's tears flowed freely now. Stop. Then something unexpected happened. Victor smiled. Not kindly. Cruelly. Deliberately. And in that moment Ava finally understood something. Victor wasn't sharing information. He was using pain as a weapon. Just like always. Just like everyone had warned her. The realization changed everything. Slowly, Ava wiped her tears away. Then she stood. Ethan immediately noticed the difference. The fear was still there. The grief was still there. But something new existed now too. Strength. Victor noticed it as well. Ava. She stared directly into his eyes. You know what's funny? Victor frowned slightly. What? Her voice stopped shaking. For a year I thought you were the most powerful man in the world. Silence filled the room. And now? Victor asked. Ava smiled through her tears. Now I just see a coward. The words hit harder than any punch. Victor's expression darkened immediately. The mask slipped. For the first time, everyone saw the monster beneath the charm. Careful. Why? Ava took another step forward. Because you can't control me anymore. Victor's jaw tightened. You don't understand what you've done. Ava laughed. I understand perfectly. Another step. You lost. Victor opened his mouth to respond. Before he could, federal agents stormed through both entrances simultaneously. Weapons raised. Commands shouted. FBI. Hands where we can see them. Don't move. The room exploded into motion. Victor glanced toward the exits. Toward the agents. Toward Ava. Then he realized the truth. It was over. Completely over. Slowly, for the first time in years, Victor Kane raised his hands. The agents moved immediately. Handcuffs clicked into place. Rights were read. Cameras recorded everything. Victor never stopped staring at Ava while it happened. But now the look had changed. The confidence was gone. The certainty was gone. Only hatred remained. Ava stared back without fear. Eventually the agents escorted him outside. As Victor disappeared into the darkness, Ethan looked at Ava. You okay? She thought about the question. Then slowly nodded. For the first time in a long time. Dawn arrived several hours later. The Arizona sky turned gold as the sun rose above the desert. Federal vehicles filled the streets. Evidence was collected. Statements were taken. Arrests continued. The operation had become larger than anyone expected. By noon, national news outlets were reporting on the case. By evening, names connected to Victor's network began appearing publicly. Judges. Politicians. Executives. Lawyers. Powerful people who spent years believing they were untouchable. One by one, they started falling. Weeks became months. More arrests followed. More evidence emerged. More victims came forward. The network collapsed completely. And with every new revelation, Ava found herself healing a little more. Not quickly. Not easily. But genuinely. A year later she stood outside a small community center in Colorado. A sign above the entrance read, Hope Harbor Recovery Foundation. The organization helps survivors rebuild their lives after abuse and exploitation. Ava now worked there full-time. She listened. She encouraged. She helped others find what she had nearly lost forever. A future. One afternoon a familiar motorcycle pulled into the parking lot. Ethan removed his helmet and smiled. You still overworking yourself? Ava laughed. You still pretending retirement isn't an option? Absolutely. They embraced briefly. Then sat together outside while the sun dipped toward the horizon. The silence felt comfortable. Familiar. Peaceful. Eventually Ava looked toward the sky. You know something? Ethan raised an eyebrow. What? She smiled softly. The day I met you, I thought my life was ending. Ethan nodded. I remember. Ava watched the sunset. Turns out it was starting. The biker smiled. For several moments neither spoke. They simply watched the fading sunlight together. The road that brought them together had been born from fear. But the future waiting ahead was built from something stronger. Courage. Hope. Survival. And as the evening sky turned gold above them, both understood a simple truth. Sometimes the people who save your life aren't heroes because they're fearless. They're heroes because they stop when everyone else keeps driving.